A homeless girl walks up to a millionaire at a rooftop restaurant and asks, "Can I eat your leftovers?" But neither of them knows the truth. They're actually mother and daughter, separated 16 years ago. "Ma'am, can I eat your leftovers?" The voice was soft, trembling, barely more than a whisper. Julia Bennett paused mid-bite, her fork hovering above her half-eaten steak. She slowly looked up from her plate, blinking under the warm golden rooftop lights of the luxurious Skyview Hotel. The city skyline glowed behind her like a million tiny stars, and the hum of quiet jazz music floated in the air. But none of that mattered now. Standing at the edge of her table was a girl, skinny, dirt-covered, maybe 15 or 16 at most. Her dark, matted hair hung in front of her pale face. She wore a coat 3 sizes too big and shoes so worn they were nearly falling apart. Her arms wrapped tightly around herself, more out of fear than warmth. First, Julia was startled. A girl like this didn't belong here. Not in a place where a single meal cost more than most people's weekly salary. Normally, security was ironclad. People like this, homeless, desperate, never made it past the front entrance. But somehow this girl had. And now she stood there, trembling, staring at Julia's plate like it was a feast from heaven. "Please," the girl added, her voice cracking. "I haven't eaten in 2 days." For a moment Julia said nothing. Her mind raced. She could hear the hushed murmurs around her. A woman at a nearby table gasped and whispered, "Why isn't she being removed?" Another man shook his head in disgust. Julia could feel their judgment. But she didn't care. She was staring into the girl's eyes that looked oddly familiar. Not just the hunger in them but the shape, the color. A deep brown framed by long lashes. There was something hauntingly personal about it. Without a word, Julia slid the plate across the table. "Sit down," she said softly. The girl's eyes widened. "Really?" Julia nodded. "Yes. Eat." The girl hesitated, unsure if this was some kind of trick. But when she saw no anger or judgment in Julia's face, she slowly pulled out the chair and sat, almost like she didn't believe this was real. Within seconds she was devouring the food. No fork, no manners, just survival. Julia watched in silence, her own appetite completely gone. She could see the girl's hands trembling with each bite, not from cold but from pure desperation. "What's your name?" Julia asked gently. "Lila," the girl mumbled, still chewing. "Lila Harper. I sleep under the bridge near 9th Street. Julia's chest tightened. That name. That street. Back when Julia was 17, she had lived on 9th Street. Long before the corporate towers, the luxury clothes, the black cars. Back when she was just another scared, pregnant teenager, abandoned by her parents and left to make the hardest decision of her life. She named the baby Lila. Her Lila. Could it be? "How old are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 15. "I think," Lila said. "Foster homes don't keep track of that stuff too well. I ran away last year. Been on the streets since." Julia swallowed hard, trying to remain composed. She reached for her wine glass but didn't drink. Her hands were suddenly cold. "I'm sorry you've had to go through all this," she said. Lila shrugged. "It's just life. Some people get lucky. Some don't." Julia's eyes stung. No child should talk like that. "How did you get up here?" she asked. "I followed a waiter. Acted like I was cleaning tables. Nobody looked at me twice until I reached the food. Then I saw your plate. Her voice trailed off. "I couldn't take it anymore." Julia reached into her purse and pulled out a small leather wallet. She handed Lila a crisp $100 bill. "Get something warm to wear tomorrow. And maybe a good night's sleep at the shelter on 4th. Lila took it slowly, as if unsure it was real. "Why are you helping me?" Julia didn't answer right away. Her mind was spinning. Could this really be her daughter? The one she had never stopped thinking about? "I don't know," Julia finally said. "Something about you feels familiar." Lila paused. "You remind me of someone too. I don't know who." They sat in silence for a few moments, the noise of the restaurant fading into the background. The bond between them was quiet, invisible but strong. "Would you like dessert?" Julia asked, smiling gently. Lila's eyes sparkled. "I've never had dessert in a restaurant before." Julia ordered 2 slices of chocolate cake. When they arrived, Lila took her first bite and actually smiled. A real soft smile that made her look younger, almost innocent again. That smile. That dimple. Julia gasped quietly. She had the same one. The connection hit her like a tidal wave. The dates. The name. The street. The eyes. The smile. No, it can't be, can it? Lila, Julia said softly, leaning in. Would you be willing to meet me again? Tomorrow. The girl nodded. If you're buying cake, definitely. Julia laughed for the first time in what felt like years. Then it's a deal. But inside her heart thundered. She needed answers. DNA. Records. Anything. Because this wasn't just a homeless girl begging for leftovers. This might be her daughter, the one she gave up but never truly let go. And fate had just brought them back together. Julia signaled for the girl to sit down, her fingers shaking slightly as she waved off the restaurant staff who were now approaching, clearly ready to escort the girl out. One sharp look from Julia stopped them in their tracks. She was a woman who wasn't used to being questioned. The girl, skinny and dirt-smudged, stood frozen for a second. She looked around nervously, unsure if this was a cruel trick or a real invitation. Then, slowly, as if her legs barely had the strength, she lowered herself into the cushioned seat across from Julia. Julia gently slid her untouched plate toward the girl. Go ahead, she said softly. The girl's eyes widened, and for a heartbeat, Julia thought she might cry. But instead she grabbed the fork with shaky hands and began eating. Fast at first, like she was afraid it would be taken away. Then slower as the taste and warmth began to calm her. Her hands trembled with every bite. It broke Julia's heart. People at nearby tables glanced over with disapproving eyes and whispered behind their napkins. But Julia didn't care. All she could focus on was the girl in front of her, and the overwhelming feeling in her chest that something wasn't right. Or perhaps something was too right. What's your name? Julia asked gently after a long pause. The girl swallowed a piece of steak and looked up for the first time. Her eyes were dark brown, wide and intelligent, with a weariness far beyond her years. Lila, she said. Lila Harper. Julia felt like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. Her throat tightened. Lila? She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in over 15 years. Yet it echoed through her heart like a memory too painful to forget. I live under the bridge, the girl added, her voice softer now. Near 9th Street. Julia blinked. 9th Street. 1,000 images flashed through her mind. Rusty apartment buildings. Cold, cracked sidewalks. A teenage girl barely surviving, pregnant and terrified. That was her life once, 16 years ago, before everything changed. Before her big break. Before the money. Before she left it all behind, including the hardest choice she ever made. She had given birth to a baby girl in a rundown city hospital. She was only 17. Alone. Penniless. No family to turn to. No support. No future. She had named the baby Lila. Lila Bennett. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she blinked them back quickly. She couldn't break down. Not now. Not here. That's a beautiful name, Julia said, trying to keep her voice steady. The girl gave a tiny sad smile. Thanks. I don't think my real mom picked it, though. It was just what they called me in the system. The system? Julia asked, already dreading the answer. Yeah. I've been in foster care since I was a baby. I don't know who my birth parents are. I was bounced around a lot. Some homes were okay, most weren't. I left when I was 14. Been on the street ever since. Julia felt like she was going to be sick. Her nails dug into the edge of the table beneath her perfectly manicured fingers. She had given up her daughter thinking she'd have a better life. She was promised that the baby would go to a loving family. That she'd be safe. Cared for. And now here she was. Sitting in front of her. Hungry. Homeless. Alone. Julia looked closer. The same almond-shaped eyes. The dimple on her left cheek that appeared when she smiled. She hadn't noticed it before, but it was unmistakable. Her cheekbones. Her nose. They weren't just similar. They were the same. Julia's heart pounded. She didn't want to ask, not yet. Felt impossible. And yet deep in her gut she knew. She was looking at her daughter. Do you remember anything about your family? Julia asked, her voice soft. Lila shook her head. No. I was too young. Just stories from caseworkers. They said my mom was a teenager. that she gave me up in the city hospital. I used to dream about her when I was little, that she was a movie star or a singer or something amazing. Sometimes I thought maybe one day I'd run into her on the street or she'd come back for me." She laughed bitterly. But that was just kid stuff. Julia fought to keep her composure. Every word stabbed deeper than the last. This girl had grown up wondering where her mother was. And all this time Julia had been living in a penthouse, attending charity galas, trying to forget the past she'd buried so deep. And now fate had placed it right in front of her. Lila. Her baby. She was alive but barely surviving. The silence between them stretched. Lila pushed the empty plate aside and wiped her mouth with a napkin, trying to be polite. "Thanks for the food. I should go. Before someone kicks me out." Julia reached across the table and gently touched her hand. "No, wait. Please stay." Lila looked at her, confused. "I'd like to talk a bit more. Maybe help you." Lila hesitated, then nodded slowly. And in that moment the past and present collided. Two lives once torn apart by pain and desperation, now sat across from each other. Unaware that they shared the same blood, the same heartbreak, the same name. But the truth was rising. And neither of them would be the same after this night. Julia couldn't stop looking at her. Every time the girl lifted her eyes from the plate, every smile, every glance, it was like watching a shadow of her younger self. The sharp cheekbones, the soft curve of her jaw, those almond-shaped eyes that blinked with uncertainty and hope. But it was the dimple, barely noticeable, tucked into her left cheek, that truly unraveled something deep inside Julia. She hadn't noticed it at first. It only appeared when the girl smiled for the first time, halfway through a slice of chocolate cake Julia had ordered as a small treat. That one moment shattered every doubt she had been trying to push away. These weren't just coincidences. Felt impossible. Absurd. But with every second that passed, the impossible felt more like the truth. Still, she tried to steady herself. She took a slow sip of water, her hand trembling just slightly. "Where are your parents?" Julia asked gently, as if the answer would confirm the truth already echoing in her heart. "I don't know," the girl Lila replied, her voice quieter now, as though she was used to her story being ignored or dismissed. "I've been in foster homes since I can remember. Some were okay. Some weren't. Most were just places to stay. People who wanted the check, not the kid. I ran away last year." Julia's stomach twisted. She had heard stories like this before. Through donations, through charity events, through distant conversations at fundraisers. But this wasn't some faceless statistic. This was a girl who had just finished her dessert with wide, thankful eyes. A girl who, for reasons Julia couldn't explain, felt heartbreakingly familiar. Everything was lining up. The age. The features. The name. Lila. The bridge on 9th Street. The timing. It was all too much to ignore. Julia excused herself, murmuring something about a phone call, and slipped away from the table. Her heels clicked across the marble floor of the rooftop dining area. But she hardly noticed. Her heart was pounding so loudly she could barely hear anything else. She walked to a quiet corner near the railing, overlooking the glittering lights of the city below. From up here, the streets looked like veins of gold. But somewhere down there, a child, her child maybe, had been sleeping in cold, wet alleys for over a year. She took out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in months. "Cameron," she said when a man's voice answered. "It's Julia Bennett. I need a favor. Right now." A pause. "Of course, Julia. What do you need?" "There's a girl," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "Her name is Lila. I don't know her last name. She said she's about 15 or 16. She mentioned foster care. She said she was born in the East District. I want you to find out everything you can about her. Every record. Every document. Anything you can access." There was a short silence on the other end. "Is she in trouble?" "No," Julia replied softly. I think she might be someone I knew a long time ago. I think she's connected to me in ways I can't explain right now." She didn't say it out loud. Not yet. But the words hovered between her and the phone like a fragile truth. "I think she's my daughter." Cameron's voice was calm, reassuring. "I'll look into it tonight. If she's been in the system, there'll be a paper trail." "Thank you," Julia whispered. She ended the call and stood there for a moment, breathing in the warm night air. though it did little to calm the storm inside her. Her hands gripped the iron railing as she stared down at the dark outlines of the streets. She had spent years trying to forget, trying to silence the aching part of her heart that never healed. The baby girl she gave away at 17. The decision that haunted her every birthday, every Mother's Day, every quiet night alone. She had believed it was the right thing. She was poor, scared, alone. They told her the baby would go to a family who could love her and care for her. She imagined a safe home, a backyard, bedtime stories, school photos framed on a mantel, not cold bridges and empty stomachs. The guilt hit her like a wave. When she returned to the table, Lila was still there, sitting up straight now, clearly uncomfortable but trying to be respectful. She had wiped her face, folded the napkin, and placed her hands neatly on her lap. It was a small thing, but Julia noticed. "Thank you for the cake," Lila said, looking down at her fingers. "And for, well, everything." "You're welcome," Julia replied. She sat down, trying to smile, but the emotions underneath were too raw. "Do you have somewhere safe to sleep tonight?" Lila shrugged. "The shelter's full most nights. I go behind the bus terminal. It's not so bad if it doesn't rain." Julia bit her lip, her instincts screaming at her to take the girl home right now. But she had to be careful. She needed answers. Proof. She didn't want to scare Lila or overstep. "Would it be okay if we met again? Maybe tomorrow?" Lila looked surprised but nodded slowly. "Sure, if you want to." Julia smiled as best she could. "I'd like that very much." Inside, her heart was pounding with a quiet, desperate hope. Because something inside her already knew. She had just met the daughter she lost 16 years ago. And this time she wasn't going to lose her again. Ask ChatGPT. 2 days later, Julia was sitting in her sunlit office when her phone rang. It was Cameron, the private investigator. His voice, usually cool and businesslike, had a softness to it now, like he understood that what he was about to say would change everything. "She's yours, Julia," he said quietly. "She was born in the East District Hospital on July 2nd. Your name is on the original birth certificate. Lila Bennett. After she entered the foster system, her records were sealed and her name was changed slightly. That's why it didn't show up easily in public databases." Julia didn't respond at first. Her mouth was open but no words came. Her knees felt weak, and she sat down slowly at the edge of the sofa, one hand clutching her chest. It was true. Everything she had suspected. Every heartbeat, every instinct, every quiet ache that had risen since that night on the rooftop. All of it had been leading here. Tears welled up in her eyes, then spilled down her cheeks. She didn't try to stop them. "She's my daughter," she whispered. 16 years of regret came rushing forward like a tidal wave. She remembered every moment, the cold hospital room, the way her hands shook as she signed the papers, the desperate promises whispered to a sleeping infant. "You'll be safe. You'll have a good life. I'll always love you." But life had been anything but kind. She thought she was giving her child a chance. Instead, the girl had grown up in pain and instability, foster care, abuse, hunger, sleeping under bridges. Julia sat there for a long time, her mind spinning. Her daughter, the little girl she had imagined for so many years, had been just blocks away, wandering the same streets Julia used to walk herself. While Julia built an empire, bought mansions and attended charity galas, her daughter was struggling just to survive. She wiped her face and stood up with purpose. She picked up the phone again and called the number Lila had written down before leaving their first meeting. When the girl answered, her voice was hesitant. "Hello, Lila," Julia said, trying to keep her tone calm despite her racing heart. "Would you like to come over? To my house? I'd like to see you again." There was a pause on the line, then a quiet, "Okay." 2 hours later, the girl arrived. Julia had sent a driver to pick her up, and when the large black car pulled into the circular driveway, Lila stepped out cautiously, eyes darting around like she wasn't sure what world she had just entered. The Bennett estate was nestled behind wrought iron gates, surrounded by manicured gardens and fountains. It was a place built to impress, but to Lila, it looked like something out of a dream she had never dared to have. She stared up at the towering front doors, the ivy crawling along the brick, the delicate crystal chandeliers glowing softly through the windows. Julia greeted her at the entrance with a warm smile and a trembling heart. "Come in," she said gently. Lila walked slowly through the doorway, her eyes wide with awe. The marble floors gleamed under her sneakers, and the massive staircase curved upward like something out of a fairy tale. She touched the edge of the banister, just to feel something solid. "This place is huge," she whispered. Julia chuckled softly, but her voice cracked. "It's just a house. You're what matters." She led her into the sitting room, where a fire crackled gently and the scent of fresh lilies filled the air. Julia poured them both some tea, though her hands were shaking so badly she nearly spilled it. Lila sat on the edge of the velvet couch, looking like she didn't quite believe she was allowed to be there. After a long pause, Julia sat across from her and took a deep breath. "Lila, there's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something important." Lila's eyes flicked up to meet hers, alert but uncertain. Julia hesitated, her throat tight. "I think I'm your mother." Silence. Lila stared at her, confused. "What?" Julia swallowed hard. "I had a baby when I was 17. I was alone. Scared. I thought giving her up was the best thing I could do. I didn't have anything. Not money, not support, not even a roof over my head. I gave her a name. Lila. I loved her. I never forgot her. And I've been carrying that pain ever since." The girl blinked, frozen. "I had Cameron, my investigator, check everything. Your birth date. The hospital. The adoption records. It all matches. I know this must be overwhelming. It's overwhelming for me too." Lila didn't speak. She looked down at her hands, her eyes glossy with tears. Her breathing was shallow, her chest rising and falling quickly. "I thought you didn't want me," she finally said, her voice barely audible. Julia's heart shattered. She moved to the couch beside her and gently reached for her hand. "No," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted you more than anything. I didn't know how to give you a good life. I thought I was doing the right thing. But I was wrong. I see that now. And I'm so sorry." Lila bit her lip, her shoulders trembling. Then, without warning, she leaned forward and buried her face in Julia's shoulder. Julia wrapped her arms around her and held her tightly, rocking her gently like she had wanted to do for 16 years. "I've got you now," she whispered. "I'm not letting go this time." And in that moment, all the years of pain, all the distance and loneliness, melted away in the warmth of a long overdue embrace between a mother and her daughter, finally reunited. Ask ChatGPT. It didn't happen overnight. After the emotional reunion, things were far from perfect. Lila didn't immediately accept Julia as her mother, and Julia understood why. 16 years of separation left behind more than just questions. They left scars. Lila had grown up learning to rely only on herself. She had lived through betrayal, disappointment, and silence. Words, no matter how sincere, couldn't erase that kind of pain all at once. Still, Julia didn't give up. She brought Lila home and gave her a room of her own. Not a guest room, not a temporary space. A real bedroom, carefully prepared. She had filled the shelves with books, remembering that Lila had once mentioned she liked to read at shelters when they had small libraries. The closet was stocked with soft clothes in every color, and a desk sat under the window with a brand new laptop on top. There were lights shaped like stars, a corkboard with a handwritten welcome note, and even a stuffed bear perched on the bed. It wasn't about the money. Julia had spent her life building wealth, but for the first time she wanted that wealth to mean something. She didn't want Lila to feel like a guest. She wanted her to feel safe, like she belonged. At first, Lila hardly spoke. She was polite, quiet, and distant. She always kept a bag packed, tucked under her bed as if she expected to leave at any moment. She didn't know how to trust that this life, this house, this warmth would last. Julia let her be. She didn't push. Instead, she cooked meals, invited her to sit and eat, asked how her day was, and kept the door open for Lila to walk through in her own time. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, the walls began to crack. One morning, Julia walked past Lila's room and found her sitting at the desk, sketching something in a notebook. The door was open. The music playing quietly in the background wasn't the sad, lonely kind Julia had heard before, but something soft, hopeful. Lila didn't say anything as Julia passed, but she looked up, and for the first time, she smiled without flinching. Later that week, they started watching movies together in the evenings. Nothing fancy. sometimes just old comedies or cartoons. They'd sit at opposite ends of the couch, but Lila laughed, really laughed, and Julia cherished every sound. The real change came one rainy night. The thunder rolled across the hills, and lightning lit up the sky as they sat curled up under a blanket, watching a film about a young girl searching for her place in the world. The main character reminded Lila of herself, and halfway through the movie she went quiet. Julia glanced over but said nothing, letting the silence hold them. After a long pause, Lila shifted closer and leaned her head gently on Julia's shoulder. Her voice was small, almost lost in the sound of rain. "Do you think we can start over?" Julia's breath caught in her throat. Her arms moved instinctively, wrapping around Lila's shoulder, holding her close. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered, her eyes stinging with tears. "We can." From that moment something shifted. There were still hard days, moments when Lila pulled away, overwhelmed by a memory or a fear she couldn't name. But she always came back. And each time, Julia welcomed her with the same steady love and patience. Julia began to notice the little things. How Lila organized her bookshelf by color, how she made tiny doodles in the margins of her homework, how she still slept with the stuffed bear every night but tried to hide it under the covers in the morning. All of it reminded Julia that she wasn't just gaining back a daughter, she was learning who she had become. Lila started school again with Julia's support. And though it was tough at first, she worked hard. She didn't talk much about her past, but one afternoon after volunteering at a shelter with Julia, she opened up. "I think I want to help kids," she said quietly as they drove home. "Like kids who don't have anyone. I want to be someone they can count on." Julia felt a lump in her throat. "You'd be amazing at that." "I was thinking about being a social worker," Lila continued. "I know how it feels. I could make it different for someone else." That night, Julia cried alone in her room, not from sadness, but from a kind of joy so deep it ached. Her daughter, after all the pain, was dreaming again. Not just for herself but for others. Inspired by Lila, Julia shifted her entire focus. The luxury fashion boardrooms and real estate meetings no longer fulfilled her. Instead, she began dedicating her time, her energy, and her wealth to helping homeless youth. Kids who had been forgotten by the system, just like her daughter had been. She started a foundation, partnering with shelters and youth services, creating programs for education, housing, and emotional support. At every event, every ribbon cutting, Julia looked out into the crowd and saw Lila, standing tall, proud, and no longer a shadow of the girl who once asked for leftovers. They weren't just mother and daughter now. They were a story of second chances. And while their beginning had been painful, their present was full of healing, and their future full of hope. Ask ChatGPT. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional and inspiring stories like this one. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a moment that could change your perspective. See you in the next video.